The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has been crisscrossing the Middle East, trying to stop the conflict engulfing the entire region. Today he returned to Israel, where he discussed humanitarian aid with Prime Minister Netanyahu. But diplomatic efforts have failed to secure even a brief ceasefire so that the Rafah Crossing to Egypt could open. And that's left foreign nationals trapped in Gaza and desperately needed aid stuck in Egypt. As our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, now explains.
Here's the aid the people of Gaza need. Food, medical supplies, clothes, bottles of drinking water. Scores and scores of truckloads of it. It's all stuck on the Egyptian side because Israel, which administers the border with Egypt, won't let it cross.
We have blankets and medicines with the convoy. God willing, we will cross. We are waiting for approval.
There's no doubt about the need. But the Egyptian authorities believe that Israel doesn't want aid to go to the people, but the people to go to the aid. In other words, that Israel is trying to force Gazans to become refugees. Egypt fears that would not only put an unbearable strain on their resources, but also might destabilize the country. So the Egyptian foreign minister, meeting his French counterpart in Cairo today, says Egypt won't admit Gazans.
I stressed Egypt's rejection of any attempts to resolve the Palestinian cause through military means or displacement. I also underscored the importance of allowing humanitarian and relief aid to pass into the Gaza Strip.
During the mopping up operation, Haganah forces seek out every Arab.
In 1948, in the war for the founding of the Jewish state, more than 150,000 Palestinians were forced from their homes in what became Israel to Gaza. More were displaced in the Six-Day War in 1967.
There is a historical memory here. That every time you've seen Palestinian refugees flee from conflict, they're not allowed to go back, even though they want to go back. And that's been the case in 48. It was the case again in 67. There hasn't, and these are huge population transfers.
And if you're 90 years old and have been displaced twice in your life already, that's enough. Better to stay in Khan Yunis in Gaza and suffer than move and have to start all over again.
For us right now, whatever happens, we will not be displaced. Why should we? Right now they're striking us, but we won't leave our homes or migrate. Where should we go? There is nothing left.
Yesterday, the US Secretary of State met the Egyptian president, hoping to broker a deal at least to allow foreign nationals to leave Gaza and some aid to get in, as yet without success. Before that, he was in Saudi Arabia, where Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman reportedly kept him waiting for several hours.
Mr. Secretary, how did your meeting go?
Very productive.
The negotiation to normalize relations between Saudi and Israel now on indefinite hold. Today, the US Secretary of State was back in Tel Aviv.
Thank you for coming, Minister. We always knew that the United States is a great ally.
You know our deep commitment to Israel's right, indeed its obligation, to defend itself and to defend its people.
Across the Arab world, people are watching these apocalyptic scenes from Gaza and growing ever more critical of their leaders' previous cooperation with the Jewish state. Arab leaders fear protests and instability, which makes it difficult for them to entertain American entreaties to give Israel the benefit of the doubt.
Well, joining me now is Ruth Wasserman-Lande. She's a former Knesset member with the party of Israeli opposition leader Benny Gantz, who joined an emergency unity government after the Hamas attacks. Thank you for coming here to our outdoor position. Welcome. First of all, the delay of the invasion and American diplomacy. Is the invasion being delayed of the Gaza Strip because the Americans have put pressure on Mr. Netanyahu?
So, Matt, first of all, I'd like to say that there is a context to the invasion, and the context is very important to explain the carnage, the massacre, the rape, the beheading of babies that had occurred on Saturday, is something that the Israeli civilian population, the country, has never experienced. I say
Not
this...
since the Holocaust.
Well, as a country, since the establishment of the State of Israel, we had never experienced this kind of inhumane, heinous behavior, which shames Islam, by the way. This is not Islam. Sure. The reason why I say this is the time and the manner in which Israeli defense forces will enter into Gaza will be decided upon in exactly the same manner. It will be precisely thought of not when who comes, for example, from the United States, but according to the capabilities and the surprise factor.
So you've got 360,000 troops and dozens of tanks poised on the border, and you will go in at some stage. What's the plan for once you've gone in? Who ends up running Gaza once you've removed Hamas, if you remove Hamas?
So first of all, you're asking something regarding the day after, and the day after is not an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is very important to comprehend. This is something that is the extremists versus the normality of humankind, and that's why there would need to be a coalition, including Egypt, Jordan, the United States, European countries, Saudi Arabia.
Some multinational force trying to run the Gaza Strip?
Not run the Gaza Strip, but rather giving the backing to what needs to be done. And what needs to be done, and this is just the first step. The Hamas is saying that this is a first step. Only a first step, because the next step is to kill all the Jews throughout the world, and the next one is the West. So what I'm saying is that there will need to be an international coalition in what? In cleaning the evil forces out of Gaza for the sake of the Palestinian inhabitants as well, and then having some kind of a rebuilding of this place in a normal manner.
Okay, but those Palestinians who've become refugees again in their own territory, have moved south, and many of them are telling us, in fact all of them are telling us, that they're afraid that they won't be allowed back to their homes. And of course, whenever Palestinians have become refugees in the last 70 years, they've not gone back to their homes. So is this going to be different?
I just want to say one thing. The reason why refugee camps in Nablus remain refugee camps is because of the Palestinian leadership.
But what about in Gaza? Will they be allowed back?
They will not only be allowed back, we want to see Gaza rebuilt in a manner which will enable them to live normally and not as hostages of the Hamas. And
but how can you, sorry to interrupt, but how can you guarantee that they won't want Hamas back in power? Maybe Hamas is popular enough for them to get them back in power. I mean, you don't know that.
Hamas is a heinous terrorist organization. It bombarded the bridge, allowing the Palestinian civilian population to flee the bombardments. When the IDF is telling a civilian population, we want you out so that we don't hurt you. Let us take care of those who carnaged us, raped us, beheaded our babies, and there's no going back on that. And if any other country thinks that this can go unanswered, it's absolutely impossible. But they will be allowed to come back because we don't want to be in Gaza.
So what do you say to those Palestinians? And we'll speak to one in a minute. Here in Ramallah, in the West Bank, you say Israel has done everything to undermine the moderate Palestinians of the Palestinian Authority in recent decades. And that's why you end up with Hamas.
I would like to see the president of the Palestinian people say that he condemns
he did it today. He did it this morning.
In the strongest terms, not alongside condemning the Israeli bombardments, but the hyenas.
He did it this morning. He condemned the violence against Israel.
It's not violence. The violence.
He condemned the, I don't know the exact wording, but he said the atrocious attacks against Hamas.
I know the exact wording because I speak Arabic, and I want to say, 10 days after crimes that are inhumane to describe, they are not they are not normal enough to be spoken of here. There are videos showing, and who made those videos? The Hamas operatives. They were proud of their Nazi-like crimes. This is inhumane to wait 10 days and to very, very briefly condemn in Arabic while also comparing the Israeli bombardments is not a condemnation. We wish to see, by the way, one more sentence.
Very quickly, sorry, we're running out of time.
We are not against the Palestinian people.
Yeah.
We are against being massacred, burnt, beheaded and raped.
Okay. Ruth Wasserman-Landi, thank you very much indeed. Got to leave it there. Well, Hanan Ashrawi is a prominent Palestinian politician and activist who was a leading member of the PLO. I spoke to her earlier and I began by asking whether she would agree with those who say that Hamas's brutal attack against Israel has set back the Palestinian cause by decades.
Not really. It depends on where you want to look at it. The Palestine cause has been suffering enormously from Israel's brutal attacks and ongoing occupation and ongoing killings and home demolitions and land theft and resource theft. So we have been in a trajectory that was entirely destructive, with Israel acting with full impunity and the Palestinians not having any type of protection.
But if Hamas hadn't resorted to such extreme measures, whatever the context is, then millions of people would not be suffering in the Gaza Strip now. You would not be dealing with an evacuation of half the Gaza Strip. You will not be dealing with all the suffering that is going on right now because of Israeli airstrikes in response to Hamas's attacks.
You cannot say that this latest escalation is a result of Hamas. It's a result of an ongoing policy by means of which Israel wanted to complete, as Netanyahu said, they wanted to finish Gaza. They wanted to get rid of Gaza. And then they said, okay, we want to get rid of Hamas. And then they demonized Hamas and dehumanized Hamas and all the Palestinians along with it.
But Hanan Ashrawi, you talk about Israel dehumanizing Hamas. I mean, to be frank, Hamas has done a lot to dehumanize itself with its actions, hasn't it?
I think Israel has dehumanized itself in many ways for decades, and it got away with it. The Palestinians tried to go to the international court, international organizations, tried peaceful nonviolent resistance, tried the negotiations and signing agreements, tried every possible peaceful way, popular resistance. They were shot at, they were killed, they were labeled, they were maligned. Not just Hamas, all the Palestinians.
If and when Hamas is removed from the Gaza Strip in the next few days or weeks, what do you think will replace Hamas? What's the plan there?
Do you think Hamas will be removed from the Gaza Strip? Do you know what Hamas is? Hamas is a big movement. Hamas has a military wing and has an armed wing. And Hamas has institutions. Hamas has government, which they, of course, shelled and destroyed, all the ministries. Hamas has a women's movement, has a student movement. It is part of the very fabric of Palestinian life. How are they going to remove it? Excuse me, are they going to kill all these people? And are they going to undermine Hamas in their own people's eyes? No. If you ask the people of Gaza, they say, at least somebody stood up for us. Somebody stood up and did something. And they don't understand that by escalating violence, by killing more Palestinians, they are not weakening Hamas. They are weakening the other side. They are weakening the PLO, and they are weakening all the people who embarked on a negotiations path and who said, all we have to do is be nice and the world will sit up and listen. It didn't happen.
Do you think Hamas has more legitimacy than the Palestinian Authority in the eyes of Palestinians, including in the West Bank?
It's not a question of legitimacy. Look, there were elections. We do need elections again. And both ran for elections. And Hamas got more seats at one point. So, and there is a division between Gaza and the West Bank, political as well as territorial, as well as demographic. But I think if we have elections now, and if you have people who are the younger people, more forward-looking and so on, you probably will have a whole new dynamic. But because both Hamas and the PLO and all these people have been in place for a long time, and because nobody could deliver to the Palestinians, Hamas now gained more recognition, let's say, by the Palestinian public because they were seen to do something about their oppression.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Hanan Ashrawi, thank you very much.
You're most welcome. Good talking to you.
Well, Mary Beth Long is a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense under President George W. Bush. She joins me now live from Washington, D.C. Mary Beth, it's good to have you back on the programme. I just want to start talking about America's role in the region. So you've had Antony Blinken travelling around the Middle East, 7 stops, I think, in 2 days. He's back in Jerusalem, back in Tel Aviv tonight. He was kept waiting all night long by Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. And America, despite its power and clout, did not manage to open the crossing between Israel and Egypt. What's going on there?
Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me. I think actually it's not America's responsibility to make sure that the Rafah and other crossings are open. Certainly not over the Egyptians of the Egyptians. And the Egyptians, as you well know, are ambivalent. There is a concerted effort to get Palestinians who are moving into secure areas where they can have water, food, and other medical care distributed to them. And I think that that's still very much under negotiation with the principal parties, which is Egypt.
But presumably Antony Blinken was told by the Saudis and by the Egyptians and by others that if Israel comes down even harder on the Palestinians, and this is even a greater calamity for Palestinian civilians, however awful and atrocious the attack of October the 7th was, then this could ignite real rage on the Arab street, couldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And if you look at what the IRGC published over the weekend as when it took credit for planning this under...
You mean the Iranian Revolutionary Council?
Yes, actually, yes, and the Quds Force in particular through their Kayhan, they took credit for actually planning this under Soleimani, and one of their tasks was to make sure that no matter what happens, that this become a global issue and that this empower the axis of Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the other resistance movements. So that was one of the goals. And of course, these issues of dealing with legitimate concerns of Palestinian civilians who need access to the basics, they knew, it was certainly predictable and foreseeable that there would be issues about getting these people to safety and getting them secured and taken care of. And what I'm appalled about is no one seems to hold the Hamas government accountable for the fact that it did little or nothing to prepare its own population, and even if it needed to do something in secret, to prepare for the inevitable problems that would result of its heinous action against Israel.
Right. So you've got 2 US aircraft carrier groups poised in the Eastern Mediterranean. You've got the Iranians flexing their rhetorical muscles on this. How dangerous is this moment for the region?
Very. In fact, the Iranian foreign minister just hours ago made a statement along the lines that if the U.S. did not restrain Israel, that Iran would not sit by the sidelines. Number one, evidence about really what is going on here, Hamas being used as a tool of Iranian hegemonic aspirations. But number two, a call to the rest of the region to look at this unfortunate conflict in that manner. I believe it is Iran's goal to sacrifice the civilians of Palestine, Hamas, the PLO, the region, for its own ambitions against the United States. And it's a shame.
Now, I've been asking all my guests this evening the same question, and I've had very different answers. What do you think the plan should be for what happens in Gaza if and when the Israelis move in and remove Hamas? Who gets to run that place?
Well, first of all, I think that decision needs to be made by the Palestinian people. I don't believe that having an occupation, no matter how benevolent that occupation may be in the long term, is what the Palestinian people want. Whether there needs to be an interim
But they might want Hamas.
They've chosen Hamas and they're living with the consequences as we speak. So I would hope that some rationality might enter into the people of Palestine. By the way, one of Hamas's spokespersons just told Al Jazeera that the rapes, the kidnappings, and the atrocities were not committed by Hamas militia, but by Gazan civilians. Okay. How more outrageous could you be against your own population than to accuse them of going along with Hamas and committing those atrocities in Israel. This is a people that deserve a much better government than Hamas.